Hello and welcome back to the shed. In today's episode we're going to be sharpening the handsaw that we restored in the previous episode. Now in this video we're going to be talking all about the terms related to sharpening a handsaw, particularly a rip saw, which this is, which I will explain what that is in a little bit. And I will also be releasing another video that goes along with this one related to sharpening crosscut saws. Hope you enjoy. So before we even start sharpening the saw, there are a few terms related to sharpening handsaws that we need to know. The first of that is pitch. Now, pitch is measured in two different scales. TPI, which is teeth per inch, and PPI, which is points per inch. So let's dive in and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I have a demo saw here. It's not the one we'll be sharpening today, but it's got larger teeth, so it's easier for explaining this. So teeth per inch are measured from the gullies, which is the bottom of the teeth here. Points per inch is measured from the top of the tooth. So, what's the difference? Teeth per inch, we get a ruler with a 1 inch mark that you can see here, and we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teeth. So now let's move it across so we're lined up with the points. As you can see here, the 1 inch mark is lined up with this point. And what have we got here? 1 point, 2 point, 3 points, 4 points, 5 points, 6 points, 7 points. So as you saw with that close-up example, the difference between teeth per inch and points per inch is that points per inch is always one number higher. So you can always take the teeth per inch and add one to get the points per inch for any handsaw. So why do we have two different scales? Well, teeth per inch traditionally was the British way of measuring the pitch of a handsaw, and points per inch was the traditional way that the Americans used it. So essentially there is not really any difference to it. They're just two different scales measuring for the same thing. The first point of call is I'm going to deal with why this is called a rip cut saw and what a rip cut saw is. So a rip cut saw essentially has teeth that are designed for cutting down the board or with the grain. Their orientation looks like a set of chisels, and I will get a picture up here to give you a close-up of that so you can actually see what I'm talking about. So after that, I'm going to move on and we need to deal with the rake. So what is rake? Well, rake is the angle on the front of the cutting tooth. So along the length of the saw plate, what is that angle, the front of the tooth? I will put another picture up here that actually explains it better than I can, but I'll bring you in close so I can try and explain it to you on the saw. So I've got my handsaw here. I've got my triangular file which we use for sharpening a handsaw. I'll talk a little bit more in depth on the triangular files later on. But for now, we're talking about rake. Obviously, I've already told you that rake is the angle on the front of the tooth in the plane of the metal. What that means is, it's the angle that we have in this plane as we rotate this way, and it's the angle between the point on the top and the gully of the tooth. So, how steep it is. So the steeper the rake, the more aggressive that saw is going to be. So essentially, our rake is all to do with how aggressive our saw is going to be in the kerf when we're cutting. Now we're going to talk about FLEAM. Now, when it comes to a rip cut saw, we tend to have 0 FLEAM, but I will still just lightly touch on it, but I'll go into more detail on it at a cross cut because it's more important there. So what FLEAM is the angle on the front of the cutting tooth. So it's in this plane, the cross plane. So when we're at right angles to the plate, what angle is on the front of the tooth? What I'm talking about is, when we're in here, it's this angle here, in this plane. What angle do we have on the front of that tooth? Now, in relations to a rip cut saw, which this is, we don't have any FLEAM. So FLEAM is at 0 degrees, which is always 90 degrees to the saw plate. Now I'm going to move on to the third and final term that we need to know, and that is set. So when we sharpen a handsaw, if we had no set, we would be cutting a gap for the saw that is the same thickness as the saw plate. And that would mean that it would bind in the cut. So the purpose of set is to widen the curve right at the teeth to give enough clearance for the saw plate to run through the cut without binding. So essentially, when we're like this, we're actually crossing across like that, so we're making the teeth a little bit wider right at the cutting edge. I'll put another GIF here that shows that so you can see a quick close-up of that. Now I'm going to talk about files. Now, there's a lot of confusion when it comes to the triangular file. A lot of people say that they are a three-sided file, which in actual fact that is not correct. They are a six-sided file. They have a little flat on the point on all three points of the triangular file, making it a six-sided file. And that means when we are filing through the gully of the tooth, we are actually creating a flat on the bottom of that. When it comes to choosing a saw file, there's lots of different things. There is tapered, double tapered, double extra slim, all of these terms related to the size of the file. Now, yes, on a smaller saw, you're probably looking for a double extra slim or tapered file. That is just to do with how many teeth are on there. Really what counts, and the easiest way to choose your file, is to take your saw, put your file into it, see that it fits to the size of the tooth. But the most important thing you want to look for is that the file is more than double the height of the saw tooth. That means that when we're using the file, we don't end up with the middle of the file going blunt before the outer edges, because it would be getting hit twice as you rotate the file when you're sharpening. That is the most key factor when it comes to a file. Now, it does pay to try and get better quality files if you can. Most of the cheaper ones from the big box stores I find don't last very long. This one is a Barco file, and I read a blog where Paul Sellers recommended it. I've been using these for a few years now, and I find they actually work very well and stay nice and sharp, and I'm still using them. So I would recommend trying to chase down the blog where he talks about it, because he gives specific model numbers on the files, and that is very helpful. I will try and find a link to that and put it in the description below for you. The other file I'm going to be using is just a straight, flat, single cut file. That's for jointing the top of the teeth to ensure that they are all at the same height before we start filing. And last but not least is holding the saw to sharpen it. Now, I just use a piece of wood like this with a kerf cut in it with the saw, and I find that works very well, and I just clamp it in my vise, use the seat, and it's at the right height for me. There are also metal saw vices, you can see just up here, and wooden ones that look like this as well. You could perhaps make your own like Rob Cosman has, and I think they're a very good option. But for me, at the moment, I haven't built one, so I'm just sticking with the piece of wood, which is the cheapest and easiest way to get started. So what I'm going to do is, we'll put it in to this and hold it in the face vise. So I always hold it and bring it in from the heel first, because I always start filing from the heel first. You'll see a lot of stuff on the internet, people liking to start filing from the heel first or from the toe. Really, it doesn't matter, but I choose to file from the heel first because these teeth get hit the least, and they use the least, so they actually wear down and are bluntest the least, which means they're a good reference to start. The other thing is, when you're getting a file on there, you want to get it as close to the edge of the teeth as you can. That prevents movement in the saw plate while you're filing and prevents vibration, and means that the sharpening is going to be much easier. So once we've put it there, it's just a simple case of bringing it down into the vise and clamping it. So the very first thing when we get in close and we start sharpening, I find it's important to have a nice light, so I've just got a portable lamp here just to bring the light right in on top. You can use magnification if you've got trouble with your eyesight, but you really want to be able to see the teeth and see what you're doing. So the first thing we do is we take our flat file that we have here, we sit it and hold it 90 degrees. Now I'm just supporting this with my fingers against the piece of wood, and I find it holds it well enough to do this process. You can buy specialist jigs. I know Veritas sells one which clamps onto the side to hold 90 degrees, and you would use that to do this jointing process prior to clamping it in your saw vise. But what we're doing here is, the aim is to put a flat on the top of every single one of these teeth. And what that's going to do is ensure that all these teeth are at the same height for when we come to sharpen. So I usually find that only a couple of passes is needed, but you come across and always start at the back. And in this case, a few more passes are going to be needed. So as you can see just here, some of these have got a flat on the top, but then you come here and there's no flats on the top of any of this. So you just got to keep going until you get a flat like this on the top of every single one of the teeth. If you have some teeth right at the back here that aren't quite got the flat on the top, you don't have to worry about it, because you do very little chopping in this back little bit, and it's really not going to affect things much. But from about that first 2 inches right through here, you want to make sure that you have a flat on the top of every single one of these teeth, as we do right now. You can see there's all these shiny points right along. So now we start sharpening. And because we're doing a rip cut, as I explained before, we're holding the saw plate in here, and each of these teeth is already at 90 degrees because it's an aggressive saw, so I'm just going to keep it there. It's a little bit back from 90 degrees actually. So the front of these cutting teeth is set back a little bit off the most aggressive, and that just means that the saw is a little bit easier to start. So what we're looking to do is put the same amount of passes of the file onto every single tooth. Now obviously when we look at this, the tops of some of these saw teeth have barely been hit by the jointer, and some of them have had more, which in this initial resharpening of a saw that hasn't already been sharpened and the teeth aren't already even, it requires you to do a little bit of finessing back and forth on the teeth to ensure that all the teeth are even. Then you can come back and joint again and just do 1 or 2 passes on every single tooth to sharpen it. Since we're doing a rip cut saw here, all of the filing can be done from one side of the saw plate, which speeds the process up and makes it easier. And it means that we do every single tooth in a row. So we start back here, like this. And normally I would hold it up here, but so you guys can see it on the camera, I'm going to start back here. So all you're doing is guiding the file through the tooth. You're not putting any downwards force on it. You're literally just supporting it and then letting the file do the work. So your aim is to file these teeth until that flat on the top disappears. Now to do that, you have to file on both sides of the teeth. So you have to be quite careful when you're doing this initial instigation of the teeth. Now if we have a little tiny flat on there, at this stage it doesn't matter, because we're going to come back and joint it to actually do the final sharpening. So as long as you get most of it away, that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of this. I'll bring you in really close so you can see what I'm doing, and I will bring up any issues that arise. Now if you're struggling to see the tips of these, you can go ahead and use a permanent marker to mark the tops of them. That's it's a good idea when you don't have a dirty saw plate. When you've got a dirty saw plate like this, because it's being restored, you can pretty much see where you're going. But if you do struggle, especially when you're coming back to resharpen, permanent marker is good because then you know that if once the marker is removed, you've sharpened. So when you're sharpening, obviously it's coming together of two planes, as I've explained in previous videos. So what you have to do is, when you sharpen the front of one tooth, you're sharpening the back of the next tooth. So to get all of these even right the way through, you can finesse the sharpening on the front and the back of the tooth to actually get what you're trying to do, which is the two planes coming together to make the saw sharp. So now that I've done this once, what I'm going to do is come back in, run the file over the... So we'd run the file over the top like this. Twice is usually sufficient, and that's put a flat back on the top of all these teeth. Now I'm going to take a marker so I can see what I've done. So now these are all dark, I know that there's marker on there. So now the whole process is to evenly do however many strokes, which should be about just one stroke on each one of these teeth, consistent and evenly right through. So now that we've shaped these teeth and sharpened the whole lot, we now have to go through and set. Now, that involves using a saw set. Now, these saw sets have a fixed amount in the taper of this adjustable bit here, and then there's an anvil that comes through on the inside just here. So there's an anvil just here, this piece, which comes up, it closes up on the plate, and then there's another little piece that's angled on there that pushes through, and that is what actually puts a set into the tooth. So what we have to do is set one tooth one way and one tooth from the other way. So we'll start with the way that it's already set, so we're not countersetting it. And we're going to set this up nice and high so we can get the saw set in on there. And we'll set it in the vise like this, just here. And we'll come in and we'll set everything from one side, then we'll turn it around and set everything from the other side. So having a quick look at this, the very first tooth at the back is set away from me, so that's where we'll start. So as we're doing this, we want to get every single tooth. Now, you don't have to set a saw every time you sharpen it. In most cases, you can probably get away with setting a saw every 5 or 6 sharpens of a saw. And if you're not using it every day, you're probably only going to be sharpening a handsaw such as this maybe once every 3 or 4 years. So it's something that you need to learn how to do, but it's not something that you're going to be using every day. When it comes to doing this, just take your time. You don't want to rush it and you don't want to miss any teeth. You just want to make sure that it's all done right so that the saw cuts right. When you come to use it, you want the saw to be cutting correctly. So if you're comfortable with doing this, you could just turn around and come from the other side. But I prefer to turn the whole saw around because it's easier and just gets you easier access to the whole saw. And then you know that you're pushing away from you with every press of the saw set. So now we've finished sharpening the saw. We'll take it out and we'll take it for a test. So what I got here is a piece of scrap pine. And we will start the cut here. And as we can see, that cuts perfectly. So there you go, folks. That is how you sharpen a rip cut handsaw. Don't forget to look out for the video that I'm going to do on a crosscut saw as well. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you saw in this video and would like to support me and allow me to continue making these great videos for you, please consider liking and subscribing and checking out my Facebook and Instagram pages. I also encourage you, if you have any questions related to the content in any of my videos, please leave it in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. Thank you.